Hello everyone, I am Simone and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about the first European settlement in Chennai area. For those of you who don't know, Chennai, previously called Madras, is one of the largest cities and busiest economic hubs of India, and it is located in the southern portion of the east coast. It is today famous for few key sectors, such as automotive and IT, other than being the main center of the beautiful Tamil film industry. Historically, the city of Chennai developed around the English settlement of Fort St. George, established in 1639 by the British East India Company. However, that wasn't the first nor the only European settlement in the Coromandel coast, as there were others much older than these. Among these, there was the Portuguese one of São Tomé de Meliapore, founded in 1523. It is today part of the current neighbourhood of Mylapore. Although at the time of the foundation of Fort St. George, the English and Portuguese settlements were not contiguous, but about 6 kilometers away from each other, the rapid expansion of the city of Madras incorporated them into a single entity. The name of Mylapore derives from the Tamil Mayil Arparikum Or, meaning the land of the peacock's cream, and took the Portuguese name of São Tomé de Meliapore, meaning St. Thomas of Mylapore, for the events that linked this place with the Apostle St. Thomas. It is said that he had settled in Mylapore area where he died in the year 72 on Monte Grande, on the proximity of which the Portuguese settlement of Mylapore was established. Monte Grande is currently known as Thomas Mount. Here the Portuguese erected a basilica in 1523, on the site of pre-existing church. A testimony of this older church was provided by Marco Polo, that visited this place in 1292, and mentioned the existence of a Christian chapel erected over the grave of St. Thomas. We have to say that the Portuguese were already present in the Coromandel coast. They initially settled in Pulicat, at the time called Peliacate, about 50 kilometers north of Mylapore. Here they built their first trade post in 1502 with the permission of the Vijayanagar Empire authorities. The reason for the construction of another settlement in Mylapore seems to be related to the religious appeal that the site had among the Catholic authorities of the Portuguese India. Following the enormous religious importance of the site, the Portuguese started immediately in renewing the buildings linked to the life of St. Thomas. The original Portuguese church was, however, completely renovated between 1893 and 1896. The development of this settlement continued throughout the 16th century. However, being essentially a settlement born for religious and commercial purposes, the presence of the Portuguese crown was here less felt than elsewhere. From a religious point of view, São Tomé de Meliapore attracted several orders, which contributed to the spread of the Catholic variant of Christianity over the pre-existing ones. The first European religious order that arrived here was the one of the Franciscans. From 1548, the Jesuits built their permanent mission here. The Society of Jesuits initially settled on Mont Pequeño, or Little Mount, before establishing themselves in 1587 in the church currently known as Mother of God. By the half of the 16th century, in São Tomé de Meliapore, there were about 100 Portuguese settlers, mostly merchants. The Portuguese settlement importance was well known. In fact, it is reported that Saint Francis Xavier had visited it in 1544 on his way to the Far East. Moreover, we have accounts on São Tomé de Meliapore written by European travelers. In spite of this past development, the activity of the Portuguese was mainly concentrated on the settlement of Pulicat, where, by the half of the 16th century, there were already living 700 settlers. These settlers were called casados. It originally meant family men, and in India it came to designate Portuguese men married to native women. Historically, they form an important segment of the merchant communities in the Portuguese settlements in Asia from the 16th century onwards. They emerged as a powerful mercantile group by joining hands with the native traders, which was made possible through their marriage relations with native women. As a result of that, many Luso-Indian families emerged. The success and influence of some of them brought wealth and prosperity to the Portuguese settlements. Among these, it is recalled that in São Tomé de Meliapore there was the very influential and rich family of Madeiros. This family acquired a fast-growing importance throughout the second half of the 17th century, as it seems that they founded the construction, renovation or restoration of most of the churches. In 1753, a member of this family, Antonia Medeiros, sold to the English East Indian Company authorities one of her properties, on which the government house, currently known as Raj Bhavan, was built. The importance of the family seemed to have been so great that the name of Madras, the city that flourished around the English settlement of Fort St. George and eventually englobed Mylapore, originated from the one of Medeiros. By the beginning of the 17th century, given the religious investment of the Portuguese presence in the area, there were 7 active churches in São Tomé de Meliapor and its surroundings. The size of this community also increased, reaching the amount of about 600 settlers living in it. In 1606, the Diocese of São Tomé de Meliapor was created. In 1607, the Portuguese crown declared São Tomé de Meliapor a city with the creation of its municipality. The first half of the 17th century represented a period of decline for the Portuguese Empire in India. The Portuguese crown, linked by a junior partnership to the Spanish one from 1580 in the so-called Iberian Union, had few resources and strength to be able to effectively counter the growing expansionism of other European colonial powers and local Indian potentates. The immediate threat over the Portuguese settlements in India was the Dutch expansionism, that in the Coromandel coast was marked by the conquest of Pulicat in 1610. As a result, the inhabitants of São Tomé de Meliapor, where the presence of the crown was virtually not existent, decided to fortify it with defensive walls in 1614. In 1646, São Tomé was besieged for the first time by the forces of the Golconda Sultanate that managed to capture it in their second attempt in 1662. This was the beginning of an obscure period of São Tomé's history. The French conquered it in 1672. However, with their surrender to the Dutch in 1674, the city was returned to the Golconda control. In 1687, with the fall of the Sultanate of Golconda to the Mughal forces of Aurangzeb, the Portuguese, who had never abandoned the city or the region, regained some control over the settlement. However, it was mainly exercised autonomously by the Portuguese residents who remained in the city during the occupation of Golconda, rather than ruled by the Portuguese crown. São Tomé de Meliapor residents were, in fact, subject to the Mughal authority exercised in the area by the Nawab of Carnatic. However, it was purely formal, and, in exchange for the obligation to demolish the existing fortifications, it was bestowed to the settlement a broad autonomy. With the progressive decrease of the Mughal influence in the subcontinent and the growing English expansionism, the authorities of Fort St. George decided to occupy the territory around it in 1749, including São Tomé de Meliapor. Since then, the settlement, already left to itself by the Portuguese authorities, was subjected to the English control and gradually integrated into the metropolis that grew up as Madras around the British fort. Today, the original layout of the Portuguese settlement has been completely changed, and very few traces of its legacy survive. These are limited to the churches and religious buildings erected following the importance of the site, connected to the life of St. Thomas. Nowadays, the neighborhood of Mylapore is almost indistinguishable from other areas of modern Chennai that have experienced a similar architectural and urban reinterpretation over the years. Fortunately, there are many initiatives to protect and advertise the heritage of the remaining historic buildings in the neighborhood, mostly related to the English colonial period. Such initiatives are essential to maintain a continuity between past and present, as well as preserving our heritage for the benefit of future generations. It was then my pleasure and duty, as always, to contribute to keep the knowledge of the past alive.